And we are up on YouTube. And Amy, I'm going to make you co-host.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. This ad hoc budget advisory committee, and we are starting to get down to brass tacks to budget writing time. And thanks to staff for all the incredible work they put into making all this possible and as easy for us as possible. I would like to start with a moment of silence. I'd like for y'all to keep in mind the repose of the soul of General Colin Powell, who was such a great American. We had our flags at half staff in his honor yesterday. Amen.
Amen.
So we're going to talk stormwater budget here first off, and I don't know, Amy, you want Matt Fountain just to jump in, or you want to give a preface to his remarks?
No, I think you can jump in. Matt, did you have a presentation you wanted to do? You want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, that'd be great, Amy. Thank you. All right, and I tried to go with a slightly abbreviated presentation versus my normal, since I think we're all pretty familiar with stormwater projects at the moment. Let me see if I can get this to kick up into presentation mode. Okay, so here's the updated FY 2022 budget request for the stormwater department. We're currently operating sort of in three primary divisions, which most of you are familiar with: the project management group, the regulatory group, which comprises both the MS4 stormwater permitting program and then the floodplain management program, and then our field operations group. If anyone wants to talk about any of these in more detail, certainly let me know, but I'm going to jump through these in general, as I know you got a lot to cover today. And looking at mission statements, we're trying to reduce the impact of flooding on the city. Our project management group obviously manages funded projects, mitigate existing flood impacts. We basically identify potential projects and maintain functionality of our projects. And the big thing here, of course, is that we focus on existing flood impacts. We do design and build our projects based on future rainfall intensities and sea level rise, but we don't necessarily do a lot of conceptual planning for places that might start flooding in the future. Right now, we're still focused on existing flooding. Regulatory wise, we get a little bit more broad ranging, of course. This was a big focus for the department for the first couple of years. We backed off on it a little bit last year, making sure that new development doesn't contribute, nor is it vulnerable to flooding, making sure redevelopment improves flooding, and then of course protecting water quality, which is one that gets overlooked a lot, but it's become more of a topic because of the James Island TMDL for fecal coliform rhinococcus in the James Island Creek. Operations group, obviously we've been spending two major sections lately. They've been rehabilitating existing infrastructure. That's been a big push for the department, is to go back and kind of hit all this deferred maintenance throughout the city. Then also work on developing a simultaneous drainage infrastructure asset management program, which is sort of in its infancy at the moment. This is a slide that I should have asterisked 6 or 7 times, because I'm sure BFRC would hate this slide because it is not accurate in the sense of what numbers are real numbers. It's a general sense of how the stormwater budget is set out, but it's roughly split between personnel and then direct operating expenses, with additional money for capital and lease purchase, which lease purchase being our primary heavy equipment and Vector trucks, that kind of thing. And I should just point out, sorry, before I jump forward, right now we're talking about revenue from the stormwater utility fees. So it's our operations account, not the large project management side of the capital drainage fund. So jumping into our current challenges, just as an overview of what we're doing with budget requests. We've got the condition of our existing pump stations. These aren't in rank order, but with condition of existing pump stations is always an issue for us. These are getting to be older pump stations, so keeping reliability up is a burden at the moment. So we've been pretty active. The Concord Street pump station, which you're all probably aware of, we're finalizing our scope negotiations with the selected firm to design the upfit of that station, which will go into the CMAR construction contract over the next couple of years. And the MUSC pump station, we have a request in there today to talk about that one. Capital project workload versus project manager capacity. Got a good slide on that coming up that kind of shows where we are. The upside is that we're doing a lot of things. The downside is that we're starting to stretch at the seams, or more than at the seams perhaps, for capacity again. So we'll discuss that. One that you've probably heard a lot about this year from previous budget presentations, you're hiring, retaining positions, especially with construction capabilities. So for us, that's engineers, CDL drivers, equipment operators, any skilled tradesmen, and then kind of more labor-oriented construction work. And then planning for O&M on projects as they come online. So this is a future challenge for us, as you start to bring on very large projects like the Spring Fishburne Pump Station, and as we start getting into construction on other sort of high maintenance, high O&M cost projects, making sure we have a detailed, laid out capital and O&M plan for the next 10 to 20 years for each of those sites, so that we can put that into the budget and proactively manage them and not kind of get into the same situation we've been with the pump stations. So just a little bit of highlight on turnover detail. Stormwater permitting group. We've had 2 of our 3 engineering positions turnover this year. We actually have rehired 3 positions, which includes one of the new positions that was in the budget, and have an excellent staff on board at the moment. But that pretty much was successfully accomplished by Kinsey, mostly working 120-hour weeks for most of the year this year. So we're trying to prevent that from happening in the future. The floodplain group, 2 of our 2 positions turned over this year. We've rehired 1 of those 2 positions. The manager is still being vacant. The project management group, we had 2 of our 8 positions turn over this year. The upside is that the primary turnover has been our outreach position, so it hasn't impacted the projects too badly. We did hire in an excellent small project manager into the department, so that's helped with some of the small project work. Field operations, we have 28 current staff members and 29 current vacancies. So we're operating just under 50% for the number of people. It's not unusual that we run some vacancies in this group, as it's a very challenging work environment for a lot of people at our pay scales. But we've had kind of enhanced challenges this year, I would say, because we haven't been able to really hire temporaries or turning leave employees either, which is how we normally backfill our temporary vacancies. I think right now we've got a request in for the temp agencies for 10 staff, and we've been able to keep between 1 and 2 in any given week that they're willing to provide us with, I think, to keep the relationship going. So it's a challenge for operations.
So Matt,
really, yes.
what is the total number of your budgeted workforce in your department?
It's a good question, Councilman. I'd have to do math in order to get you that in great detail. I normally think of it as division based. The project management group, this slide here, sorry, I've got my own things blocking my view. So we sit at 8 people within the project management group. The field operations group is the one we were just looking at on that previous slide, which is the 28 and 29, so 57. Luckily, my mental math is still all right, I guess. And then the floodplain group is 2, which we've kind of folded into the regulatory group. The regulatory group has, let's see, 3 engineers, 2 inspectors, 2 admin, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think it's 8 off the top of my head. We'll double check that later. We'll get to that slide.
I just want to know what how much you're down overall. Are you down 30% of your workforce? So it sounds like to me.
Yeah, so it's a good question, Councilman. It's in 2 different. The way the department's set up, it really runs as almost 2 pseudo separate entities between field operations and kind of the office staff, professional staff. We do have overlap in our small project groups, and our project managers spend quite a bit of time with our field operations group to try to work through some of the construction work and the heavy maintenance work. But the regulatory group, for instance, doesn't have as much interaction with the field operations group. So from a day-to-day maintenance, like citizen work request side of things, we're running about 50%, about 50, from what like the development community would see, which is more the professional side of the house, that we're sitting more on the order of like 80 or 90%. It's just been that we've gone through quite a bit of turnover, so it tends to create delays, but we have been pretty successful in rehiring those positions at the moment. We worked with HR quite a bit this year and the end of last year to kind of figure out as we were losing positions, what we could do for rehiring positions. And we found some very, very excellent folks who were mostly looking, I think, for a shift from consulting. I certainly don't want to speak on their behalf for what their motivations were, but they've been incredibly excellent that we've picked up. So we're happy about the new employees we have, but that transition period, especially at a larger organization like ours, where it's typically 3 or 4 months, before you can have a position go vacant and then successfully rehire a position, can be hard on people. So that's sort of where we're sitting at the moment. It's a pretty small group still. Stormwater is not a very large department other than field operations, which is 57 people, a little bit bigger.
Yeah, when you talk about losing 2 here and 3 there and 28 there, it's not necessarily the number, it's a percentage that impacts that particular division. Right? I mean,
yes, that's exactly correct. Yes. Yeah, 100%, Councilman. That yes, if you're in field operations and you lose one person, it's not too difficult. That's just part of doing business, and you always have turnover, and you kind of plan for that. When you're in a group like I was talking about in this previous slide, if you have 3 review engineers and you lose 2 of them, that last review engineer is having a really bad time for quite some time.
Yep.
Matt, let me ask a question. Go back to that previous slide, Matt, if you could.
This one, Councilman?
No, the one prior to that.
The revenue slide?
No, it was one with the chart showing projects.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. So I've been jumping around a little bit. That was my next slide, I guess, rather than my last slide. This will be my next slide.
Well, if you hadn't explained it, go ahead and explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Councilman. So that's a very good intro. So this was talking about one of our challenges for project management, and this is a good story, but a story that results in challenges, right? Let me try to give some framework. I tried to build a slide that was easy to follow, but the more I worked on it, I think the harder it got to follow. I should have had Ryan Landry do my slides for me because his are great. But so these on the bottom here are the years. This is fiscal year 2019, which for us is calendar year, and 2020, and 2021, and 2022, and 2023 projected out. The blue are projects that were in construction. The green are projects that were in design in that year. And obviously, I talk about this quite a bit with my project managers. None of our projects truly work on a fiscal year basis, right? You don't start everything in January and end it in December. But it's trying to focus on what was the bulk of what was occurring during any of these given years. So what we back in 2019, we had 4 projects in design, 2 projects in construction. Moving to 2022, you can see a little bit more going into construction, quite a bit more going into design. Moving into 2021, we have more project work coming into design, more project work coming into construction. And what you'll see over the next 2 years is dependent. And again, there's never a certainty with projections. But we're projecting 2022. We're pretty certain on because we're almost there. But it's continuing construction increase to 2022 and then to 2023. The design starts to taper. Some of that is because construction lags 2 or 3 years behind origination of a project and funding because it takes time to get through design and permitting. Where design work tends to have a lag only of about 1 year to 2 years. So what you're seeing is in 2023. I haven't included possible projects that haven't been budgeted yet at this point, where basically if we decide to add in new projects, that's what you would see being designed in 2022, and especially in 2023. So you'll see the design falling off as if we were never going to fund another project, which I doubt will be the situation. And what we're trying to show on this slide is that basically we're having a real increase in the number of projects in construction, which is a very high demand time impact on the project managers. The design is also an impact, but we want to make sure we still have capacity to be able to do these future designs while this construction is going on, so that we don't basically not have projects lined up in, like, what do you want to call, like a pipeline or a queue, where each year something moves to construction, that lets something else start design, that lets something else start conceptual design. So every year you have new work to keep building, rather than kind of finishing a project and then starting design on the next project and having 5 years until you build something again.
Just Dudley. Central Park, that's the Wamba, isn't it?
Yes. So Central Park was designed in this 2020 year, this original design work.
Right.
We have a proposal and a task to move into final design and permitting, which we could certainly do in 2022 if, for instance, that's one of those projects. It's a good example of the budget ad hoc committee, puts drainage fund money into that project, then we would add that into the design in 2022. Probably finish up permitting in 2023 and look to go to construction on some of it within 2023 or 2024.
Didn't we set aside specific dollars for Central Park that we'd recaptured from somewhere else?
So we did have money for Central Park for the original design work. I'd have to pull the exact numbers, $300 and something thousand. That was the original drainage evaluation that came up with the 4 improvement project areas. We also were successful in acquiring CTC funding from the county that the county is using for the first part of the Central Park repairs they're looking at over on kind of the Howell Avenue side of the basin.
Right.
But we so far, and again, we're not touching too much on the drainage fund at this meeting. This is kind of more the operations account, but the drainage fund component of the Central Park does not have assigned funding to it yet from any council actions.
Okay, because I thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that $5 million came from somewhere. I can't remember. I have to go back. That we were going to dedicate it specifically for the Central Park project. I can't remember where we got it from.
Let me help you out, Councilman. It came from refinancing a bond.
Thank you.
We talked about using the savings from that finance, right, Councilmember Waring?
Correct. That's exactly right.
And so I guess my question is, given that, at what point will construction start? I know construction's already started on the county part, but in terms of what we have to contribute.
So the design work is started on the county part. They're still in the very early design phases on the road improvement work. They have let that contract and they've hired a engineering firm. The city side, if we decide again to allocate that funding, which, as you mentioned, I think Councilman Gregory and Councilman Warren certainly reminds me, as it was discussed that we could do, we could start design next year. There's quite a bit of critical area permitting. AECOM has a scope already prepared for us with a rough fee that we could finalize. It's probably 12 to 18 months to be able to get into construction, depending on what the OCRM permitting goes through. They've been running a little bit longer than that recently, but there's the potential that it could be shorter because the county's also been working on a similar side of permitting with that project. So if we can try to leapfrog off of their work, it's possible that it could go a little faster, but I'd hesitate to say anything faster than 18 months for construction with the permitting that's required on that project.
Okay, I just don't want us to sleep that potential funding source there.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think part of the discussions with that were the way the refunding worked, and we're getting a little bit outside my area, but the way the refunding worked last year, we almost actually like double paid. So we had a higher cost for closing out the old bond and paying the origination, I guess, on the new bond. And I'm probably using the wrong words there. And I think we'll start seeing those savings now starting this year moving forward. But we did, Ms. Wharton did have a presentation to Public Works Utilities, I believe it was, Councilman Waring, on kind of where we stand with the existing drainage fund and what the unallocated resources were, which was somewhere on the order of $25 million over the next 5 years, Councilman Gregory. So there is money. It just needs to be looked at which projects we want to fund. And that's part of what we're talking about here, I guess, is if we want to fund more projects with how much we already have in the pipeline, that's where we're looking at more positions, because otherwise we basically have to wait till some of these projects close out to be able to pick up new positions, which is the next slide, which was one of our request items, was the project management practice leader, which is a term you see a lot in professional service work. Practice leader, where it's basically like a managerial position that still has a technical focus rather than a pure supervisory focus. So it's a sort of like a managing doctor would be, where you're still seeing patients all day. You're not just managing other doctors to make more money for your practice. So this would be basically establishing a senior project management position that would provide some additional managerial capacity, because right now all the project managers report directly to me, which, while I enjoy project management, and it's certainly something that I prefer more than most of my duties, I'm starting to get a little stretched on capacity for managing that many projects in addition to the rest of the department. But it also provides some resiliency if we were to lose a project management position. And then going back to this slide, by the time we hit end of 22, beginning of 2023, that position will be fully utilized as well, just in trying to keep up with the amount of project work we have going, even if we don't add anything. So it's good. It's good that we're building a lot of things and that we are doing a lot of great work, and we have found a lot of funding to do this, but it does result in a lot of work for department to accomplish.
Matt, just to go back and continue with that, Mr. Mayor, you're right, and certainly Councilman Gregory, you're right. I think we need to make the action step. We had a lot of good momentum around that when we found out we're going to have a savings as a result of that, refunding of the bond at a lower interest rate, but we need to recapture it so it'd be more specific in the way I guess Matt is going to outline funding on this. So I guess it has to show up on your Ways and Means, Mr. Chairman, eventually. But let me ask this, sooner rather than later. Can you go, I'm gonna go back to DuPont, the doo-wop, I know it's on the study, but and design, but my understanding is that the county already has it. This is one of the few first projects I think that we're doing in conjunction with the county. My understanding is the county already has their money set aside to do their portion of this project.
And Councilor Warren, I'm happy to talk about any of these in more detail. I know today's meeting was just for the operations side of the department, with the drainage fund probably being that first week of November or so meeting to get into those in more detail. I just don't want to, I don't know what Ms. Warren has for you all on the agenda.
I'll ask those questions at another time. Thank you.
Okay, and I think you're right, Councilor Warren. I think there's a lot of discussion we should be having on the DuPont WAPU. I just maybe shift it to the next one if we can.
No problem at all.
Okay.
Or maybe even a little bit later. This is Amy, I'm sorry. Just so we can go through the drainage, exactly what we did before. I guess that was what, in March or February, Matt?
Right.
Yes, yeah, we had the
Something
kind of
like that,
initial
yeah.
discussions about what funding was possibly available. Mhm.
Yeah, if we could do something like that later on, that would probably be the most helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I briefly touched on this one. This was one of the new program requests, was adding this managerial position into the project manager ranks. Supplemental to that, the project manager group also manages our pump stations. We've got two different requests for the pump stations. One is for the Concord Street area pump station. This is the one that we're in the process of finalizing our upfit design contract. But the work we did in preparation of that upfit design contract did show some short-term repairs that really need to be accomplished, basically for critical reliability purposes on the station in advance of what will be probably another 12 to 18 months of design and work with the design firm and CMAR contractor to eventually get into actual real construction on the upfitting of the station. So this is a request in the operations account for about $120,000. It's a one-time surge above what our typical annual O&M expenses are, but basically to make those short-term, not quite emergency repairs, but quite critical repairs for resiliency on that station. I'm going to jump through these unless anyone has questions, but the other request is the MUSC pump station, which we also call the Courtenay pump station. So that's where it's located. It serves that drainage basin. Basically what we would like to do on the MUSC pump station, what we did for the Concord Street pump station this year, which is go through the conceptual design work to figure out what needs to be done in order to upfit the station, how much would it cost, and then be able to prepare an RFQ to hire an engineering firm to provide the services. This will be a negotiated rate based on the Concord work. I think the high end of it is probably $300,000. The MUSC station's in better condition currently because it's not quite as old as the Concord station, not quite as complicated, a little smaller. So I think we can get started very comfortably with a professional services firm for that amount of money. It's certainly better to do it now before things start breaking rather than kind of where we're stuck with the Concord station where we're doing it as things are breaking. So it's not a crisis this year, but it's still something that is absolutely worth budgeting for and planning for. Let's see, project management. This one was kind of our lowest priority request, but it's one just to be aware of that, as I mentioned, we're pretty tight, to put it mildly, on project management capacity. We do only have 5 total project managers in the department for the projects that we're running. We do have a lot of work that's starting construction in the next 3 to 4 months. So there is the potential that if we do have any turnover in those positions, which we've been very lucky to avoid so far, to basically have a backstopping program. It's what the AECOM program management contract was built for originally, was basically to provide supplemental services. So I put in a request for $250,000, which is somewhere around 5 months probably of a consulting project manager to assist with the project. Typically, they're going to bill between $160 to $180 an hour plus project management support work. So the upside is that they're kind of an on-call. You don't have to employ them long-term. The downsides are very expensive per hour. So that one's on there as a request. Hopefully we won't need it. Regulatory program, just a quick overview. This is not one of our main focal topics for budgetary discussions this year. We've did quite a bit of regulatory work the last few years. The only position that we're asking for within this group is to add a lead stormwater inspector. Basically, this is a position that would provide public infrastructure review. This is currently something when new infrastructure is installed as part of developments, it's something that currently the Public Services Division inspects for. Public Services has been extremely short-staffed as well recently. So it's kind of exposed some risks when stormwater infrastructure potentially goes in, that whether or not there's the capacity to adequately inspect and verify installation. Certainly there have been some historical challenges that we found with emergency repairs and with small project work for things that were just not installed correctly, but are far away, very far out of the 1 to 2 year warranties that are typically provided for work. So this would add a third inspection position into the department, in addition to the 2 current MS4 SWIP inspectors. Try to close out basically that need for emergency work, as much emergency work in the future. There's no way to eliminate it. Things break, but you're trying to prevent things from breaking because they were not installed correctly. So cost is a little bit lower on these. There's initial vehicle expense, but it's even as a loaded position, it's around $65,000 a year, fully loaded. Field operations, just again, a quick overview of what we have as a field operations group. We've been working through our rehabilitation program. As you're all aware, we're a little bit more than halfway through front yard ditch maintenance of the whole city. Generally very, very popular, barring 1 or 2 neighborhoods, as Councilman Jackson unfortunately found out, but generally been very successful and very popular. Infrastructure rehabilitation for the closed system has been more challenging. We have quite a bit of pipe system. We did manage to get through about 10,000 feet of the east side this year. We still have some plans for the next couple of months to work in some other neighborhoods that really have that need. We did add our small project manager this year, which has helped us do a little bit more management of this program, but really it's been contractor driven because we've been so short on CDL drivers and Vector truck operators, which are CDL drivers, that most of our Vector trucks are just doing work requests, citizen work requests, rather than kind of proactive cleaning work. We do certainly hit some of the known flood areas for inlet cleaning and things, but for more proactive pipe, like thorough pipe cleaning, tends to be contractor driven. Just as a quick overview of what we talked about last year, we're working on our asset inventory, but based on some work we did in DuPont Wapu and Council Orange District, looking at clogs and problems within pipe systems on a more holistic basis within that watershed, we're estimating, if you project that out over the rest of the city, around 100 miles of pipe that probably need maintenance and cleaning. That kicks us up to roughly $5 million of contract cleaning. Likely there's going to be repair costs in addition to that, but that's kind of the ballpark we started at. Based at last year, we had done $633,000 towards this. We haven't successfully spent all of that money due to some of our management shortages, but I think with that additional project management position, we should be able to do a little bit more proactive pipe cleaning. If we can kind of clean at this rate, we could probably get through most of our pipe cleaning 2028, 2029 timeframe that we need to get to for trying to help that system perform more effectively. So that's kind of jumping into this field op support, which are the other requests. We had a $20,000 request, which is a 15% increase in construction materials costs. That's really inflation based. Inflation's actually up more than that generally for construction materials, but we're also a little bit short on staff, so we're not installing quite as much as we usually would install. We've got a 30% increase in what we're actualizing for uniform and protective equipment. It's about $10,000. This one's a range of things. It's been an increase in prices or some inflationary increases. We've increased our field operations manager, who's an excellent gentleman, has increased kind of the amount of protective equipment we hand out. We started adding like Tyvek suits and things when we're cutting like caustic elephant ear basically anything we can do to keep the guys as comfortable as possible while they're working so that we're not losing crews from the type of work that they're doing is relatively inexpensive compared to the department. And it certainly is a morale booster. And then of course, turnover of staff, we do try to recoup as much uniform work as we can, but obviously having people come in and come out, you lose some uniform work and it drives up your cost a little bit for protective equipment. We also had a $30,000 increase budgeted for basically, again, a 10% inflationary increase in emergency repairs. We have to see how this goes. Our vendors have been pushing back on our usual prices because they're really struggling to be able to make those prices work in their profit margins anymore. They've kind of stuck with us this year because we had an existing budget and we have a lot of vendors who we work well with and have good experiences with us, but they've kind of notified us that next year they won't be able to honor those prices. So we have an increase there for emergencies, 87,000. Then is the last one, which was that 13% increase in contractor pipe cleaning, take it up to 750,000 to try to cover up some more of the vacancies and proactive cleaning work. As our vac trucks are not fully utilized every day based on a combination of things, with mostly with vacancies on the operator positions. That's what I had for you today. I'm happy to jump back through any slides or any questions in more detail.
Matt, can you go back to the previous slide, not the last one, but the one prior to that?
The closed systems cleaning?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go through the part about cleaning out the pipes and all of that again.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Councilman, I said that very quickly. So we don't have a really spectacular asset inventory at the moment, like basically knowing where every pipe is and what condition it's in. That's something we've been working on of getting back to that step. Right. The one place we have a pretty good handle on it is in DuPont Wapu, because we did that as part of the DuPont Wapu project with the county, with AECOM doing most of the assessment work. So what we did is we looked at how many of the pipes needed cleaning or were having issues from cleaning related issues, or having capacity issues from cleaning related issues in that watershed, said, okay, it's this percentage of pipes. And then basically projected that percentage out into other neighborhoods. We took a little bit off of it in like Daniel Island, where the pipes are generally newer, and some of outer West Ashley, and then added a little bit more into like the peninsula and some of inner West Ashley and inner James Island, where it's a little bit older neighborhoods that probably have a little bit more cleaning that needs to be done.
Right. I think that's great. So you said the estimated completion is 2028 to get the pipes that you kind of forecasting?
That's what we're hoping is that we can work through quite a few of the neighborhoods that we did the east side this year and made a big difference on day-to-day flooding. There's still some challenges with tide and condition of the system, but the pipes are clean. So if we've started to get into Wagner Terrace at a pretty good level. We haven't done as much cleaning as we want to yet, but we've got kind of some areas identified. We've done some key area cleaning, done a couple other neighborhoods. If we can start kind of expanding that program out and doing more work with it, I think we could make some real progress again on the closed systems by 2020.
I think this is great. What can we do to speed that up? In other words, obviously, if we had more money. Now, the 2028, that's sounds like 7 years down the line. What can we do as a mayor and council to say this is working great, but if we can get them clean faster,
it's mostly funding based. That one's mostly funding based, Councilman. If we use contractor cleaning, it's almost a straight number of dollars the contractors have available, plus making sure we have project managers to be able to manage the contractors, identify the cleaning, and work through cleaning with them. And then the other option is to try to do it internally, which then we need to find a way to fill all of our factory operator vacancies, which are CDL drivers, which we have had very little success in filling the last 18 months.
Hey,
so that means I guess the alternative is to use the private sector.
Yes, and that's what we're proposing here is private sector work. That's that $750,000 is contracted private sector work.
So if you had 1.5 million, could you do it by 2025?
We would get faster. There's always a question, Councilman, of how much capacity the private sector has. They also are making a lot of money on the kind of open market at the moment, let's say, rather than under these contracts we have. So they definitely, we've got two companies we do most of our work with under contracts that do want to work with us and do want to keep, because we're good, consistent customers, and we are always there, even in recessions. We'd have to talk to them to see if they had, how much capacity they had to go up more than that. We're capped on our IDCs at $500,000 per year per company, so we could get to $1 million probably pretty comfortably. Beyond that, it starts to get a little bit more challenging. We probably have to find an alternate contracting mechanism to go forward with it. But yes, you're right. I mean, generally, if you had more money, you could go faster.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Matt,
Yes, Councilman.
have you thought of partnering with job creating organizations such as the Sustainability Institute, who do training for weatherization, et cetera, et cetera? Is it possible for us to partner with them and perhaps expand, okay, their offerings to include some of your need, and therefore start producing more workers specifically for your task?
So it's a good question, Councilman. The challenge we have generally run into with what I would call almost like an apprenticeship internship style program.
Yes.
And we do that ourselves, right? We do the safety and risk department, like train CDL drivers from our own staff. What tends to happen is that we get outbid for those individuals once they complete their training, and they just generally take private sector jobs because they pay more. It's typically younger employees who are a little more open to some of the demands of private sector work sometimes. But like, I'll give you a general example that for unskilled temporary labor, basically, day labor type gentlemen who work and kind of, carry around concrete bags and do that kind of work, we pay generally $13 an hour for that kind of position. The going rate in the private sector right now is just over $20 an hour. So we certainly can encourage more people to get into the field, and eventually, if you can generate enough interest, you will depress prices on a cost demand basis, supply and demand basis. But it needs to be a lot of people in the market we have in Charleston right now. And what we're doing right now is we're similar to what was happening in the oil fields or some other things, and not to that scale, but a similar issue where the city is so successful, which is great in a lot of ways with development and construction work and everything else, that you've used up the existing resources, including what's coming up from the training programs like Trident and some of the other programs. So you're having to draw people in from other cities, and that's been where we've kind of been in a challenge with cost of living, and that it's hard to draw people in from other cities into kind of the core of the city at the wage rates that we generally pay. And the private sector is kind of adjusted to that as best they can, which is what's driving up our costs to some extent as well in our projects. But it's a very good question. I think it's worth the city helping with those programs wherever we can, just because it's a continuing issue, and it would be good for the health of the city as a whole, the whole region, not just our own internal departments. But that's probably generally a 2 to 4 year window, and certainly about a year to get through most of those training programs. So getting interest in building up the programs, and then trying to realize some of that supply and demand enough that we have access to some of the employees. And then of course there's the other side of it, which is having capacity to help those programs get up and going, which we're a little stretched to add another project in, I guess, for that type of work. But it's a good idea.
I appreciate that thoughtful answer.
Yes.
So, and maybe I'm just having a brain block on this, but your requested budget for 2022 at $750,000 was infrastructure rehabilitation. Is that including adding more personnel to your department, or that's just fulfilling this obligation with what you got right now?
So you're hiring for this roadside close system to $750,000.
You got 2022 budget request at $750,000 for this infrastructure rehabilitation.
Right. So and that's confusing in my own way here. That last year's request was $663,000 ish. So it's basically increasing that by $87,000 up to $750,000. Or last year's funded amount, I should say. So yes, that is just pure contracted outside pipe cleaning from 2 different vendors that we use.
Okay, so you just want an $87,000 increase from last year's budget to do the work that's on that other slide.
Correct, to do more of that
Okay.
work, yes, yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
To try to, as Councilman Ware was mentioning, to try to accelerate that work a little bit. I'm trying to balance how much I think we can manage internally with how much money we have to do the work with, if that makes sense. I don't want to end up asking for $2 million and only spending $500,000 of it at the end of the year if I can avoid doing that.
No, and I understood his question as to what we can do
Yes, yep,
help you along. But when I was making sure we were comparing apples with apples and asking that.
correct. Yes, it is not a $750,000 increase. It's only an $87,000 increase, because I think that's how much additional work we can get done next year with our current kind of staffing levels.
And that was the other part of the question. Considering what you've got on your current staffing now, that does not include if we budgeted for more staffing.
Correct. Yes. So the other option, if you wanted to increase pipe cleaning beyond that, would be trying to look at potentially adding some type, and I'd have to go back and see what the most effective way to do it was, but to add another position to help manage that work. And it's not, it gets tricky in that you don't need a full-time person to manage the work. It's just right now we have it as one task that one of our project managers does in addition to a bunch of other work that he's doing. So if we want to add more capacity to do more neighborhoods, we got to find someone to take on that work. And I'd have to look at it in more detail if we wanted to go that route on how we would handle that workload. I've not tried that yet.
But and then maybe getting way ahead of ourselves on this, Matt, and I don't want to confuse the issues here, but it seems like part of the issues that you're dealing with is we need more people and we need to pay our current folks more money. And none of that's really being factored into what we're looking at on the screen right now.
So you're right, Councilman Shade. What we really need to do in field operations is fill vacancies, right? We don't necessarily, I mean, I'm not saying more positions wouldn't be helpful, but when you're at 50%, if we could fill half our vacancies, that would be a huge impact on what we could get done in any given day. For the project management side, we're looking to add a person because we are fully staffed at the moment, and we just have more work coming up in the next 2 years than we have capacity to be able to handle. So there's a mix here, and I certainly hear what you're saying, that one of the proposals we've had, if we were, and there is potential funding to be able to handle salary adjustments if we needed to, but shouldn't say that. I feel there's room in the budget for salary adjustments, Ms. Wharton, and her staff might, I haven't talked about that in that great of a detail, but I think they budgeted for it. The other side for me, I mean, honestly, with how many vacancies we have, it would be easy for me to give up positions because I would still come out ahead. If you gave up 10% of my positions and I could fill the remaining vacancies, I would have more staff than I've had in a year and a half. And I would come out well ahead. That's not always true for every department in the city because not everyone has as many vacancies as we're sitting on. But that's something that we're willing to do as well.
So if I may jump into this discussion, and it's a great discussion, good brainstorming going on here, but kind of connect a couple of trains of thought here. It seems to me that would be easier for Matt, for you to find the extra management employee or two to manage an outside contractor than it is to suddenly find 15 people to work in the field. And the way our budget is set up, I wonder if we could do it to give you the flexibility, kind of give you the option. Well, gee, if you really don't think we're going to be able to find all those field personnel, to go ahead and hire 1 or 2 more management folks and increase the allowance that would have gone to those employees. Now, those vendors you've got that are at 500, if they're willing and able to go to $1 million a year in outside contract service and include these things that we need to get done. But in essence, we're going to more outside contracting than doing it ourselves, just as a function of the labor market and where we are in pay scale right now. But to give Matt and the department some flexibility so that, you know, we're not so locked into, oh, we're looking for 28 employees, and if we can't find them, well, too bad, we just don't fill them, and next year it goes into our reserve or whatever. It's not like we lose the money, I get it, but we want to get the job done, right? So what do y'all think about that?
And we do that a little bit, Mayor, Councilwoman Jackson, if you don't mind if I just
Sure.
make a quick clarification. So we do that a little bit, Mayor, with if we have salary savings in excess of the budgeted salary savings, we have come to council a few times in the past for basically budget transfers where we would say, you know, we're funding this request based on additional salary savings we've incurred.
Right.
It's not a pre-approved budget item in that case. It has to be kind of reapproved by council with that pathway, but that is an option to basically make that recommendation that if additional funds come available from something that they could be used for, you know, additional pipe cleaning or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Jackson.
Yes, Mayor, I really like your train of thought, your brainstorming on that basis. It's occurred to me, you know, that we should be looking at the private sector to supplement our workload in many of the departments, but especially in one like stormwater and then environmental services is right alongside there. I don't really see, you know, in my crystal ball, and I'm just a layperson, but I've done studying of the labor market, certainly in listening and learning from our human resources staff. I don't see how we ever, you know, keep up with the nimbleness that the private sector is able to contribute to their own you know, capacities for growth and things like that. So the more that we develop those kinds of on-call contracts that allow us to be flexible and you know, responsive to the actual workload, I think that's a very a very smart way of us thinking into the future about staffing. It'd be different if we were going to be like, you know, cutting jobs with people in them in order to hire contractors, but that's not the case. We don't
Right.
have the people in the jobs, so we need the jobs done.
That's right, absolutely. And I just want to be able to give Matt flexibility, you know, to kind of, I know he can come back to us, but if we can give him some more flexibility to make those decisions and make it happen, I think that would be more efficient personally. We'd have to approve everything as it came to us, you know. Councilmember Waring?
I was just giving thumbs up to what you was. Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, thank you.
And the only point I would want to add, Mayor and Councilman Jackson, is you're right. There's sort of twofold of considerations for kind of a pseudo privatization approach, right? That you certainly have flexibility for gap filling with contracts and with contractors, and certain fields certainly that can be a good deal, especially if there's surges or if there's gap filling type work for availability.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, you're going to be less expensive on sustained continued operation to go internally, though of course there is the challenge, right, of availability. And then the one thing we have to be cautious about is also I don't think you meant it this way. I just want to make sure we're all clear too, that we also have to be cautious right now about retention of the remaining workforce to manage the contracted work, because that's one of the challenges we've been having. If we keep kind of bleeding positions at the pace we're bleeding them, we won't be able to contract anyone because we won't have anyone to manage that work either. So I think there's a great role for it in handling surges and handling kind of gaps in turnover.
Backlog.
It gives you flexibility basically, which is a real advantage for it. But you gotta, it's like just like any balance you're trying to make, you gotta not go too far in either direction, or else you end up in a bad spot.
Right. No, it can swing the other way. I mean, if you have the flexibility and you have a great month and you hit goal and find 15 employees, and then you can cut back on the private.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Don't cross any bridge. Keep them all open. Yeah,
Yeah, and you're 100% correct in that even if we found people tomorrow, it would take, a few months to kind of get them up on board and get them on trained up. So there is always this lag. That's why we're asking for some additional pipe cleaning money, as we know, even if things are great and council passes, a large COLA and we're able to bring in more employees, it's still not going to happen on day one. It still would take months to kind of see that impact trickle back through the department.
That's right.
yeah, and maybe just to brainstorm one more second, it would behoove us to think about strategically jumpstarting some companies. We're talking about economic empowerment and growing the market of our minorities and women-owned businesses, and maybe we could actually recruit some companies and invest in them, not financially to the risk stage, but in terms of guaranteeing them contracts. I mean, that's what kept my husband going, a long time ago, because he had some backers that knew that that work that his company did was absolutely necessary, and they basically poured resources in to his startup. So I think there's some really cool ways that we could be talking about this at the same time.
Thank you. All right, so good discussion, y'all. We'll continue to explore some of these options. Matt, was that about it for your presentation?
Yes, yeah, that's it, Mayor. Thank you. Drainage fund will be on a future meeting, but I think that covers us for the operations account.
Yeah. So, and Amy, with these requests from Stormwater, and what does the revenue side look like for funding these requests?
Andrew, did you want to share revenue projections?
Whoop, it would help if I unmuted. Sure, hold on one moment. Let me pull up. And I will share my screen. So I want to make sure that I'm sharing the right screen.
Looks like a bunch of numbers.
So this is a calculation over time of just the stormwater revenue from the fee. And this is what the budget is currently looking like for 2022. It's about a revenue budget of 11.8 million. So I'm estimating about 11.7 to come from the stormwater fees, and that's a growth from the 2021 budget of about $177,000.
And that's without a rate increase. It's just
Correct.
leaving it exactly the way it was.
Correct. So on this other tab over here, I have different scenarios. If we increase the rate per ERU, how much revenue that generates. So it's about $500,000 for every 50 cents.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And Amy, I apologize. If you sent out Matt's budget this morning, I failed to see it through no fault of yours. I just haven't been around this morning. So how does that?
I didn't send it, Councilmember Jackson, because we didn't put the formal budget together until we had this meeting. We would have just had his requests. So
okay, so how does the 177 of natural increase compare to the expense total then?
So this has to be a balanced budget as well, Councilmember
Right.
Jackson, so they match. If that's
Right. No, I'm
okay.
I'm
in
asking
terms
what
of
what is the total expense compared to the 177 projected revenue increase?
So it'd be Andrew, you probably don't have expense, do you?
So I have not fully worked out the expense side with everything, and some of that has to do with the debt from the stormwater bond to make sure it all ties out. So right now the operating without the debt is about 9.5 million, but usually with the bonded debt, it sort of has a weird offset that occurs. So
Councilmember Jackson, we just had, because we did that refunding last year. If you remember, in that refunding, it was going to change. Council authorized us to go ahead and do this from a taxable to non-taxable within 1 year, so that we got even bigger savings. So we just did that. So we're trying to work out the accounting side of that. So as soon as we get that all squared away, we can get you the numbers.
Okay, then let me just ask one more maybe overly simple question. Are you projecting then that we probably will need to raise rates in order to give Matt the increases that he's requesting?
No.
Or are we going to be okay?
We'll be okay.
Okay. All right, great.
Well, we'll be
Mayor,
okay, but there are also the considerations of, as Councilmember Waring raised, if we threw another X dollars at the maintenance, you know, of the enclosed systems, would we get it done by 2025 rather than 2028? You know,
Right. Yeah.
and excess of funds at the end of the year can go to other projects. So anyway, I wouldn't say we hadn't moved this fee in a, how long now, Amy? A few years now, hadn't it?
I think it's been 2 years, yes.
2. We didn't raise it last year.
We
Yeah.
raised it from $8 to $10 in 2019.
In 2019. So, I mean, our needs, we know our needs are going to continue to be there, and at least put in a cost of living almost, or a graduated thing over time as we go forward, is something to consider. Councilmember Shade?
yep. So, and I'm glad Andrew brought that point up when we increase this. Because as I recall, we looked at other cities and other municipalities as to how we compared with that. So have we done that recently with these other estimated increases of where we stand with other cities?
Well,
So
we weren't suggesting an increase, Councilmember Shea, but we can go back and look at if they've changed. I don't know if any of the municipalities that we compared to have actually changed any of their rates. It could just be the same.
So, Ms. Warren, really
I'm
briefly,
sorry.
there have been some changes. Generally, we are still one of the higher rates within our region. If you start to expand out into other flood-prone portions of the country, Florida, some other areas like that, you can get into higher rates. But Councilman Shade, you probably remember we did just pass through Public Works, Utilities, and Ways and Means a utility fee analysis, mostly looking at how can we improve our billing format,
Right.
Whether we should stay on the
I remember that.
CWS bill or tax bill. And one of the things that consultant will do is look at some basically corollary cities and municipalities to see what they're doing rate wise as well as program wise. So we'll get some more information.
Someone correct me on this as I remember this, but in that discussion 2 years ago, and Matt, you said that we were a little bit higher, but I thought we were more with that adjustment coming into line with other cities within our region.
So we were coming into line with some of the other cities that have these higher fees that we do. It's not as much as our region. Let's say a lot of the regions in South Carolina, the municipalities in South Carolina, will run somewhere, and it's hard to give a rough number off the top of my head like this, but roughly $70 to $80 a year, where we're normally setting $120 a year or so. Recently, there have been some significant changes, though. Mount Pleasant just passing through a pretty enormous increase for their residents, and it varies depending on how large your house is, which is one of the things we've looked at potentially is included in the stormwater utility fee. We're trying to say, larger houses do contribute more water, which ties back to the way the utility fee is adjusted. I believe, I can't remember if it's Horry itself or Myrtle Beach or North Myrtle Beach. A number of those entities have doubled their rates within the last year. They often just had lower rates to begin with. They might have had $36 or $40 a year, which is a more traditional rate system. So there have been what I would call very large fee increases across the state percentage-wise for a number of municipalities in the last year or two. Much of which has been due to the same challenges we dealt with as a city over the last couple of years. We are still generally one of, not saying we're the highest rate by any means. Bluffton, Beaufort, some of those areas have high rates. Mount Pleasant has come in line with us in large ways. If you get down into some of the other regions, it's high rates, but we're not going to show as one of the inexpensive rates within the state, let's say. But we also generally have very different flooding challenges than most of, let's say, the upstate or the PD or other areas around the South Carolina boundaries.
Well, I'd like to sort of as we revisiting this, obviously, I'd like to have some basis as to where we are and where we should be and what are our neighbors doing and what our neighbors are not doing. I think that would give us some basis as we are discussing this a little bit further.
Well, let me ask this. I thought after Columbia had their, that big flood, I think back in 15, didn't they increase their rates? Considerably. I thought we were still below Columbia.
You're right, Councilman Waring, that they're one of the higher agencies also. We might still be slightly underneath them. I'd have to double check that one, but they are one of the other very high rates as well. You're right.
And in one of the areas that, now that we obviously implementing some of the suggestions from the Dutch dialogue into our stormwater manual, when we review these developmental plans and stuff, have we upped our fees to review those plans?
So this is a very good question, Councilman Waring, and it's one that is an interesting topic that we did increase the fees in the last, when we passed the updated stormwater manual, the fees, and it's a little more complicated than this because there's a base rate fee plus a multiplier for project area. But on a general project, we roughly doubled the fees. But I'm sure Andrew, Mr. Jones could pull up the revenue tracker. I think we generally bring in revenue of roughly $75,000 a year for stormwater plan review. So it certainly doesn't pay for that work.
That's my point.
But it does offset the cost.
Yes, it does not offset the cost. I think we need to look at our fee income. I've said this before. Our banks are not good at generating fee income. They are excellent at generating fee income. If you go to a bank and say, "Let me know your pencil for an eraser," that's 50 cents. So I think we need to kind of revisit that. We ought to, at the very least, cover our costs to do those things.
Matt, Councilmember Waring. So it's this object code right here, fees technical review.
Right.
Are those fees that Matt is talking about? And so you can see, I think we had that fee increase in mid 2020. So you can see in 2020 we collected about this much revenue, and year to date, and this was a couple weeks ago when I looked at this number. So I'm estimating about $100,000 through the end of the year. So my budget right now for that fee is $70,000, just to be on a more conservative side to make sure we're not overestimating.
Great, that's great information, Mr. Jones.
Yeah.
So what does it cost us to do that? I know you don't have it, but let's say if it costs us, I don't know, $200 to do it, why don't we factor that into the cost?
We can certainly look at it, Councilman Waring.
If we're not covering our costs, then frankly, taxpayers are paying for developers. We supplementing.
It's true.
And that's where we get criticized the most for not doing the reviews quickly.
Yeah.
Well, if we had more people to pay, if they paid the high fees, we can get them reviewed.
Well, weren't we talking about doing some sort of fast track? If they can pay. I mean, that was Councilmember Appel's,
Right.
challenge to us the last time, that we should give a sliding scale to anybody who wants to get their work process faster. They'll pay more.
Anyway, I think that's something we need to revisit, the fee structure on that, at least to cover the cost. And I looked at that project manager, and we definitely need that, Matt. And we know we're going to we'll support that, but I'm just wondering how could some of those projects are ours, but somehow reviewing, there's more income under the permitting process and review process than I think we're extracting from it. That's my main point.
I agree.
So if I could ask Matt, Amy, if y'all would just check those comparables one more time around the state on the fees. It was my recollection that it was the will of council and appropriate that we almost set in a built-in schedule where we were going to be at 50 cents a year or $1 every other year,
Right, to get up.
work
Like
to
an
move
indexing. indexing, yeah.
Water fee up a bit because we know the many needs and projects that need to be done. I know the drainage fund separate and all like that, but it's all interrelated, and we only got so many ways to raise money. And people are seeing the projects. You see that mounting green list that Matt had of all the things we're doing. I mean, we're getting good bang for the buck. So I would not be opposed to not only funding Matt's request, but taking a look at some additional funding to up those private contractors contracts that we have. And if that means we can clean out the ditches and the pipes and the brick archways a little faster than what we're projecting right now, yeah, we might have to hire another project manager as well. That's okay. But I think our citizens would be happy for us to be doing that personally.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I
I
like
agree.
putting those signs out there, another project being done. I think Matt knows have signs out now when our crews are out there. I think our citizens, I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. They're happy to see those teams show up in their neighborhood.
Unless their name is Creek Point.
Exactly. All right.
Exceptions to every rule. So.
Anything else on this? Hearing not, I think we were going to review our departmental requests in general. Amy, you want to lead us on that?
Yes, I am. 1 second. Can y'all see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. So just sorry, my mouse is very touchy. Just where we stand as of today with the draft budget. Right now we have the base budget for the general fund of $207 million. There are $2.3 million in mandatory effective life increases that we have to include in the budget. We included the minimum wage COLA in there just because we did. I know it's a bigger discussion, but we have that included in there. And then we went through all the recommendations from our departments and have basically recommended $8 million. So right now with that, it's a $23 million deficit, which is, I think we all knew we would be kind of there. Enterprise funds, base budget, $36 million in revenues, $30 million in expenses. And we actually have a small surplus there for our enterprise funds of 3.4 million. So what it looks like right now is with that surplus for enterprise funds, it's about $19.5 million of a deficit, which is not good. So there's
Amy, Amy, going too fast. Go back.
Yep.
Go, whoa.
One more.
We're trying to absorb all this.
I'm sorry. I'll start right there. How about that? Better?
Yeah.
So with this slide, yeah.
The bottom line is kind of a cumulative, so it doesn't add down the column. So if that confuses you, it's just a cumulative across. So that's where the $23 million comes from. And the $927,000 in reserves that we have for the general fund, that is actually some renovations to fire stations that we have. One of our financial policies is to put $1 million away for deferred maintenance. And we had done that at the end of the year during the audit. And so that is using that funding to renovate a couple of fire stations that Parks had said they needed to do.
And Amy, we cannot use any of the $10.5 million we're getting from the feds as federal programs?
If we wanted to, well, I have kind of some suggestions on that later.
Okay, just a question. Thanks.
Amy, can you just point out where in the revenue list are the two types of, tourism taxes, accommodations and hospitality? Are they there? I know they're bundled in somewhere, but which?
They would be in this transfers in line item, Councilmember Jackson, and that would be to cover any tourist related expenses that we have. Like our officers, our police officers that work in entertainment districts and things like that, our PAOs that are in tourist areas, those types of, our code enforcement officer, our tourism officers, I should say. Those expenses would be covered by a transfer in from those tourism funds.
But that's where you also would transfer in enterprise funds then, the surplus?
No, that just is the total budget. You see that at the bottom. So normally when you look at our budget, it is the general fund and the enterprise fund at the very bottom, and then the surplus, and then that's how we balance the budget. So we don't necessarily have a transfer in line item for enterprise funds.
So wherever you see transfers in, that's coming from what I call the tourism tax
A
bundle.
lot of that is, it could be other smaller things, but that's where the tourism money would come from.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Amy,
Yes.
given the gravity of what King Street is, costing us now, with the extra enforcement and all of that, shutting down the streets and all of that. Does that the policemen, this 8 million truly reflect what we putting down in the entertainment district?
Yes. Well, we're still kind of looking at that because we're finalizing the tourism budgets, Councilmember Waring. But right now, yes, we're going back through that just to kind of make sure that we have all of those expenses covered based on what we're projecting the revenue budgets to be for those funds.
And then we back to the old subject again. I guess myself and the mayor, we got to finish this. This Commissioner of Public Work, it should be closer to 2 million. I tell you what, you can help me with this. Not now, but if you were to just simply take $1,095,000, and I think that started in 2001, and just have one of your folks calculate the cost of inflation on it for 20 years.
Yeah, I think we did that last year, Councilmember Waring. So we could just pull. I think we did that already, but
just forward to me again, because we haven't finalized the budget over there, and all we asking for is the same purchasing power today as it had back in 2001. So, that was the recurring thing that you made mention of last year. Last year.
Seems like yesterday.
I know. It's a similar subject. So go back and kind of get that in their budget so we can have it in ours.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good with this slide?
Yeah, I just want everybody to know that please look at your email from last night. It was received at 12:07 a.m. from our CFO. I don't want to say that she's dedicated or anything, but
I noticed that too, Councilman Ware, and I thought it was a mistake that you made it new. It was not a mistake. God bless you.
I keep telling Amy she's got to go to bed earlier though.
It's called commitment.
Yep.
If she went to bed earlier, we'd have less bad news today, I think.
So maybe that's the approach I should take from now on.
Right, exactly.
You forget that I have two very busy girls too that I'm trying to shepherd through life. So sometimes midnight's the only hour I have.
Been there, done that, Amy.
So this is enterprise funds as well. So you can see we have a smaller surplus. 3.4 million. Normally this is much bigger, but I think we're still coming out of the pandemic. We are going back through parking revenues, just so we might be able to increase that just based on some more data that we're looking at. But right now that's what we have for the budget is 25.8 million for parking. Remember the days of $11 million surpluses in enterprise funds.
Muni is doing a lot better than it ever has.
It is doing well, yes. Be good with enterprise funds?
Yep.
Okay, and so then this is Councilmember Jackson, kind of where we, oops, sorry. We look at the citywide over under. So, and it doesn't look exactly like this in our budget, but that's where you would see the enterprise funds surplus would take care of the deficit, hopefully in the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So like I said, we're looking at tourism funds. We just got another municipal accommodations check in. So we're kind of looking at our projection again based on that. Parking as well, analyzing that further. We are still waiting on the IRF to give us some information, our insurance information. So I'm hoping that we get that by the end of the week. Salary savings, I think I had talked to you about, we had decreased that, we had increased that a lot last year with a hiring freeze and such for to help us balance the budget. But with police and fire being as successful as they have been, we were reducing that down to 3 million. But considering our situation and the rest of the city, we're going to look at that again and see if we need to increase that a little bit. So with that large deficit, we're going to go back through all the requests to call back our recommendations. And then the things that I just discussed, will finalize those items. There are several studies that we could potentially use ARPA funds that are in this budget as well. One is a water plan, zoning ordinance. Both of those were $500,000 each. And then the downtown plan, I don't remember, I think that might've been 300,000 or something like that, which is related to the water plan. And we'll build off the land use and water section of the city plan. So those are items that we might be able to use ARPA funds for, because we are still having a revenue loss issue and not able to fund everything that we need to do.
Amy, the Senate just passed a giving municipalities more flexibility in using ARPA funds for revenue dollars. It passed unanimously in the Senate today, and it now goes to the House. So some of the restrictions you had or the calculations you had to make in determining revenue loss, they've loosened a lot of those up.
Okay.
So Amy, the water plan, zoning ordinance, downtown plan you mentioned here, are they included already in the expenses on the previous slides, or these are staff requests that did not get funded?
The zoning ordinance and the downtown plan, I believe, are in the recommended. I can't remember if we put the water plan in the recommended column or not. I think that we did. I can look real quick.
Okay.
Can the zoning ordinance, I thought it was closer to $1 million.
It is, Councilmember Jackson. They were suggesting over a 2-year period. So it was $500,000 this year and 500, or not this year. I always work in 3 years. So I'm sorry, $500,000 in 2022. And then another $500,000 in 2023 was what they said they could do.
Right. I guess knowing that that's an important next step of body of work for the council. I know that we asked Mr. Summerfield if we put $1 million in for the 1 year, could we do it in a year? And I think he said yes, but I can't remember specifically. So can we just clarify that with him?
Mm-hmm. We'll go back, because the one thing we needed to discuss too is how these all interact with each other. And, I mean, if they really all need to be done at the same time, sort of thing, which I think that they do. I know the downtown plan and the zoning ordinance would definitely need to be. I'm just not super clear on the water plan.
Okay, great. Maybe we can have just a little update about that.
Sure. Councilmember Shade.
Yeah, Amy, if you would go way back to one of the earlier slides, yeah, right here, stop. So the new request recommendations at $8 million.
Yes.
Is that just to bring us back up to pre-pandemic, pre-COVID levels, or is that in addition to where we would be plus pre-COVID levels?
So it's a little bit of both. So a lot of that would be the department's request to bring them up to their pre-COVID levels for certain line items. And then it's other things that they're requesting that we really think that we should do that aren't necessarily COVID related. They're new requests.
What did we capture? Their top 3 or 4
It
priorities?
just depends, like, yeah, and we might not be able to do all 3. It depends on the department and the number of requests that they have.
But you're going to show us that next time, correct?
Yeah, I sent the master request list to you last night as well with all the recommendations, so you can see, and I can pull it up and we can look at it too, if you'd like.
Well, what I saw was the total was still like 22. So is there another sheet that I missed that is just your top
On
10 or
that
however?
sheet, the recommendation column should have the total there, Councilmember.
Oh, okay,
The
okay,
total
I got it.
request would be that
Okay.
$22 million that you were talking about. And
Okay.
then there's a column with our recommendations.
Okay, all right. Yes, I saw that. Thanks.
Okay.
So that's the spreadsheet you sent, and
That's right.
the total requested increase was 23 million. The mandatory life safety request was 2,000,003. That's what you show here.
Right.
And
And
then the additional 9 million of staff recommended amount of increase, 9,357,000, you're not including in this deficit of 23 million, correct? If you included the 9,357,835 of staff recommendations that's on the spreadsheet, wouldn't that?
I am. So that's enterprise fund and general fund, Mayor. So this 8 million right here is the staff recommendations from the general fund. And then you have the 1.3 for enterprise funds. So that would equal that amount at the bottom that you're looking at for staff recommendations.
Okay, so it is included in.
It is included, yes.
Okay, thank you. I didn't.
And what we're saying is obviously we have to go back and kind of look back through those recommendations and pull those back a little bit, obviously.
I got you. And on this, oh, I see, you do list them in both columns if you're in the staff recommended. For example, the water plan you do show in the as a staff recommendation of 500,000.
Right.
So
That's where I'm saying that for those one-time sort of expenditures that we could probably use ARPA funds for that.
So if you could, just taking that as an example, so I understand this, if it's in your recommendations, if we're able to use ARPA funds for the 500,000 for the water plan, then basically it will reduce your projected deficit by 500,000, right?
That's right.
Gotcha.
And then maybe if there's some other changes to the federal guidance, we can figure out that there's some other items in our recommended request that can also qualify for ARPA.
And there probably are, Councilmember Jackson, I'm
Yeah.
just giving you those as examples because those are
Right.
pretty big ticket items that would help with the deficit. But there probably are some other smaller one-time items that we could maybe fund if it's the will of council to do so.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I look forward to that.
Okay. So just kind of going over lease purchase. You know what, I should have probably showed you the spreadsheet for that. Environmental services, they're asking we do this every year, just replacing equipment for them. They're asking for a sweeper, 2 dump trucks, a claw, and 2 rear loader garbage trucks for a total of $1.2 million. And then fire and Chief Curria and Chief Reynolds are both on here if you have any questions about what they're asking for. But Total borrowing is almost 3 million for fire. Biggest part of that is the new truck, aerial truck for the Johns Island fire station that we will be building. It has to come out of this lease purchase because it takes so long for it to get built. And then they're asking for 2 SUVs and then vehicle replacements, a pumper truck, 2 brush trucks, 2 trucks for operations, and 2 trucks for the fire marshal's office.
Chief, remind me what a brush truck is.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. Brush truck is a smaller unit that would allow us to get into places where normal pumpers can't go, but it also enables us to have the ability to move the unit as we're pumping water, which a larger fire truck, due to the design of the pump, can't do.
All right.
Particularly useful, say, on Johns Island and in Cainhoy.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So city fleet, we received a replacement request of 1.6 million because, we've talked about our aging fleet. We're much better with police and fire and replacing and environmental services as well. But for the rest of the city, we're a little bit behind on that. So 2 IT vehicles, there's 4 parks trucks that we're replacing, a business and neighborhood services car, streets and sidewalks Bobcat compact loader, and a trash collection light truck. And then 1 for housing and community development for a total of $367,000 versus the 1.6.
So are any of these able to be upgraded to some sort of energy savings? Thanks.
That's a good question. I looked at it, Councilmember Jackson. I'm certain they're hybrids, but I would need to look back and let you know that for sure.
Okay, good. I am a climate action plan ambassador now, so.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
That's right.
Information technology, it's all for fire and police. They're MDTs. And these are replacement plans and they're a 3-year cycle. So that's basically what IT is asking for in terms of lease purchase funding. The golf course is getting a new utility tractor. Current tractor is from 1995. So it's only $22,000. Stormwater, 3 dump trucks and 1 backhoe, and then we replace a Vector truck every year. And that will be paid out of the stormwater fund. That debt will. So our 4-year lease purchase summary is $5.5 million. 1.2 is from environmental services, 2.9 fire, 367,000 city fleet. Information technology is 179,000, golf course, and then stormwater at 785.
Are all our Vector trucks in operation given the staff level that we have right now? Can we go a year and it won't miss a beat? I'm just asking.
Not for replacing them there because they have a 5-year cycle. So we really do need to replace them every single year regardless. But Matt, you can speak. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of you. We got into a little bit of trouble not replacing them a few years back. So we've been very careful not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I can certainly chime in if you'd like more details,
Yeah.
Mayor. One of the challenges is there are, I have to double check our inventory, but either 3 or 4 that are all replaced in the same prior year. So on a 5-year replacement cycle, typically you'd be trying to replace 3 or 4 of them in 1 year. So we're hesitant to delay any because we're coming up on that where we're going to have to spread that year already. Otherwise, we'll be spending, well over $1 million just on replacements that 1 year alone. The flip side of Vector trucks is that we tend to have on our current vendor, not the new vendor we're using, but the prior vendor. Most of our maintenance was done in Charlotte. So we would typically have trucks that were down for a few months at a time for maintenance while they had to go to Charlotte to be maintained. We've switched vendors currently to a more local CAT-based vendor that can do on-site maintenance. So we're hoping that'll increase uptime. But one of the reasons we've been able to kind of limp by with the number of Vector truck operators we have is because so many of our Vector trucks tend to be down for maintenance, and that's not an unusual situation. It's a extremely challenging piece of equipment to keep fully operational, but we have just enough Vector truck operators, I would say, to continue with the number of Vector trucks that we currently have. So I'm hesitant to delay and increase that downtime. We also do a trade-in program and everything else, so it actually is a relatively good deal in comparison.
All right, just asking the question. Thank you.
And I'll send you the lease purchase list too. I'm sorry, but I probably should have put a slide in here just to show you exactly what it is, but I'll send it to you after this meeting. And then we have our 3-year lease purchase, which is all police. So in 2021, we reduced the amount that we did lease purchase for them, which allowed them to do 30 marked vehicles and 6 unmarked vehicles. The year and prior to 2021, they were at 1.6, which would let them do 30 marked and 15 unmarked vehicles, or, switch that around to whatever they may need. So we're recommending that we at least go back up to the 1.6 so that they keep up with their replacements and not get behind. In addition to that, they actually asked for $1.9 million for additional equipment. So I don't know if the chief wants to talk about that or not, but that was their request for 2022.
No, I would just iterate what you just said, that we lost 300. We are making up ground on our complement, which I think also will put additional stress. So between losing that last year and some of the emergent needs, some of the new things that have come up, and just the outfit everybody, I think that's a good number. Thank you.
So I think right now we just have the base number in there, so we would need to adjust that a little bit for the additional amount that's being requested, and that whatever the debt cost would be for that, just to let you know. So really 4-year lease is 5.5 million, 3 years is right now 1.3, but like we discussed, we were just tightening some things up and talking with the police department. So that's why we still have it at 1.3 for right now. Total borrowing would be 6.8, but add a little bit more to that because of the police department's requests, and general fund would be $6 million cost. And it's about $1 million increase in borrowing from 2021. But again, we get behind when we cut back, then we get behind. So we don't really want to continue to do that. So that's really what I have for lease purchase. I didn't have anything else unless you really wanted to go through that request list, or if you want to go through it and send me any questions, we can go over it at the next meeting a little bit more once we call back some of them a little bit. And maybe I'll just communicate with you where we are with that between now and our next meeting. We want to have another meeting November 4th at 3 if you're all available, because we feel like we need to have another meeting in between just to kind of go over tourism budgets and see where we are. So if that day works for you, I'll send a meeting request out.
Amy, I definitely have a conflict on that afternoon of the 4th.
I can't do it any earlier that day.
I think the other date that we could do it was the 2nd.
That's election day.
Oh yeah, never mind.
All right, I would like to be distracted, no problem. No, I can't come in on election.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that. So I don't know. Maybe I could go back to the drawing board with that meeting. I think, Mary, you had something on Wednesday. That would make it difficult for you.
I can move around what I got on Wednesday afternoon.
What time could you start, maybe?
Really, anytime in the afternoon. I can just shift it around anytime after 1.
Would that work for everyone else? Wednesday instead?
Yes, that works for me.
Okay. I'll send something for Wednesday at 3. Wednesday, the 3rd.
Okey doke.
Thanks, Amy.
Any
Sure.
other questions, comments?
Yeah, I think that at the end of all these meetings that Councilmember Jackson should treat us to ice cream.
It would be my privilege. I'd be happy to.
That sounds like a treat, like a good idea.
She's got someplace in mind I think she'd be willing to take us to.
Just look for the neon cone in the sky.
Cone.
Take care, guys.
All right, everybody.
Thank you.